Welcome everybody, my name is Niclas Huschenbeth and this is the Game 4 analysis of the World Chess Championship 2016 reigning champion Magnus Carlsen against the challenger Karjakin. And today, for a second time in the match, Karjakin, the challenger with the white pieces, coming back from this tough defensive job he did in Game 3 where he just escaped from a loss. Another question would be, could he maybe put some pressure on his opponent for the first time in the match, or would Carlsen maybe get closer to a victory or even get a victory finally? Because so far we haven't seen any blood, no games decided so far in the match. It has been 3 draws. So let's get to it, but before I begin, just want to point out real quick, there's a highlight video once again. This is a long analysis and it was a long game, I can tell you that much, so this is a long analysis. But if you want to quick highlights, just go to the link in the description and we'll get you right there. Alright, now we're ready to start. Let's get into this. And for a third time in a row, we see the move e4. And I'm quite happy to see this because I'm an e4 player myself. And once again, we see e5. And once again, we're heading for the Ruy Lopez. And Carlsen, just like in game 2, goes for a6 again, not going for the Berlin, what actually Karjakin just did in the last game. So going down to Berlin, and now the deviation from game 2. Game 2, Karjakin played d3, but now he's going for the main line rook e1. b5, bishop b3, castle, and here White has a number of moves available, but you can really differentiate between allowing the Marshall gambit, which would be possible after c3. And why is it a gambit? It's called a gambit because White is winning a pawn here, or you could also say Black is sacrificing a pawn. So this is a very famous Marshall, and it's a very famous gambit, and Black is having good compensation here. And you can differentiate between, well, allowing the Marshall and playing anti-Marshall lines, and Karjakin goes for one of the anti-Marshall lines, plays h3. There are also a number of other moves like a4 or, well, d3 once again. So by playing h3, now d5 would not be a good choice, and Black continues in a different way. Carlsen plays bishop b7. There are also other moves available, but this is fairly reasonable. d6, now a3. And Carlsen has had this position not too long ago, at the end of last year, in a rapid game. They played knight b8, which is a common maneuver because this knight is often kind of misplaced in the Ruy Lopez and is transferred to d7. But here in this game, he played queen d7, which is another very sensible move. Also, possibly preparing a knight transfer to e6 via d8. And connecting rooks makes a lot of sense. Knight bd2, rook e8, there's a common moves here. Bishop f8, knight f1, h6. In fact, this position has not been seen before, if I'm not mistaken. So they are in kind of new territory, but all the same maneuvers, which are so common for Ruy Lopez, maneuvering the knight over here, playing h6, h3. This is all very standard. And I think this is the first kind of critical point in the game. Here Karjakin chooses to go knight 3 to h2, which is a common maneuver once again. But it seems to me that the ensuing variations already slightly favor Black. One alternative, also standard move, would have been knight g3, and Black is ready to go d5, and probably White should take and then go knight e4 here, and position remains complex. And honestly, I would also take Black here just because Black has the center, but according to a computer, this is all about equal. The queen goes to e2, White maybe has ideas knight h4, but already it feels like the whole opening phase wasn't really convincing by Karjakin. At first sight, this looks really interesting, going knight h2 and queen f3. but it seems like Carlsen has studied these positions well, or he just knew what he was doing. Now black plays d5, very standard way to play in the center. Queen f3, and this looks strong. White is having this threat of bishop takes h6, the pawn on d5 is hanging. This looks good at first, but black just plays knight a5, of course attacking the bishop on b3. White drops back with the bishop. Now Carlsen took on e4 and positioned the knight on c4, saying, well, take on h6 if you want to. The knight is so well placed here because one of the strongest pieces in the white position is this bishop, and now this bishop is blocked, so it's not really exerting that much force anymore. And Karjakin indeed took on h6, but of course Carlsen saw it coming and plays a really nice move. Plays queen c6, defending the knight on f6, so g takes h6 is a threat now, as well as hitting the pawn on e4, and black will immediately regain the pawn. Just to point out real quick, here knight takes e4 was also a possibility. Rook takes e4, and now knight f5, now we'll run into rook takes c4, which is a strong tactic. Bishop takes f3, rook takes c7, discover check, and white will regain the queen with a lot of interest. But instead, bishop takes e4 in this position, queen takes e4, and in fact, white is down in exchange, but is having nice compensation on light squares. And I think Karjakin would have been happy to play this position, but this is not Carlsen's style. He's not going to go for such a position where he has positional weaknesses, and instead he plays a very sound and good move, queen c6. And here, Karjakin makes a grave positional error. He plays bishop takes e4, the pride of the white position. This bishop, he just gives it up for the knight, and that's no good. After this position, he's just in the defensive mode for the rest of the game. So that was a mistake. He should have dropped back with the bishop all the way to c1. Of course, this is not a move you're happy to play, but well, sometimes you need to play ugly moves. The point is you defend the pawn on b2, and also you want to have this square e3 vacated still for the knight. So if the knight takes e4, you can play knight e3 and get rid of the strong knight on c4, which, like I said, is blocking the bishop on a2. Still, this position is already more comfortable for black. Black is having the initiative here, and one sample line could go rook a8, knight hg4, and now queen g6, actually sacrificing a pawn. Knight takes c4, b takes c4. Well, white cannot take, or should not take immediately on c4 because of discovered attacks along the long diagonal. But after queen e2, knight c5, black can give this pawn up, play e4, and you can see how all the black pieces are in the game, and this would be great compensation for black, and black is definitely in the driver's seat here. So that's why I said it feels like something went wrong already earlier, because all of these last moves we saw coming up from d5 were natural, more or less forced, and it turns out that white is already uncomfortable. So let's get back to a position where we stopped. Bishop takes c4, so Karjakin takes this knight off, queen can take because of knight d2 defending the pawn and then dropping back with the bishop, white would be a pawn up. But honestly, Carlsen's not too unhappy taking with the c-pawn here. Of course, it first looks strange, doubling the pawns, but on the other hand, black's also getting a lot back in return. That is the b-file for the rook, and this is an eternal weakness now on b2. Since the pawns have already advanced to a3 and c3, white can never just exchange this pawn by playing b3, and this pawn is taking really nice control of this pawn. And also, in return for the slightly weakened black pawn structure, black's having this monster bishop on b7, which doesn't have any counterpart anymore. So positionally, this is just great for black already, and black's already having a clear advantage at this point. Bishop e3. So that was Carlsen's point. He wanted to go back to e3, but the alternative bishop c1 would have been much better. Keeping the bishop, it is a crucial piece in these Roy Lopez positions. So black has regained the pawn, knight g3, now knight d6, and Carlsen happily offers a queen trade, knowing that in the endgame he can press and press and press for a long time. That's what he's so good at. That's where he succeeded almost in the last game already. So Karjakin is in for another grind here by Carlsen, and not a comfortable situation, especially with the white pieces. Getting out of the opening with a clear disadvantage is not what he was hoping for. So rook 81, white is not in a hurry to trade on c6 either, and black could trade, but here, even though you could weaken the white pawn structure, you don't do this. This is not enough to give up this powerful bishop on b7. So this is not what Carlsen went for. Instead he played rook b8, occupying the b file already for the future if there will be a trade. Bishop c1, both players are kind of making waiting moves here, improving their position. This queen trade is in the air, and now white decides to take because he doesn't have any useful waiting moves anymore. And now goes knight g4, improving the position of the knights, but they don't really have much places to go. The white position feels quite cramped as well. Rook b5, a nice move to prepare potentially rook b8 and also just activating this rook. Nice move. f3, f5, and also protecting pawn e5, as we see now, preparing f5, gaining more space. Knight f2, bishop e7, improving the bishop. And here Karjakin made a good choice. He's going active before he's, as Peter Svidler said in the commentary, dying a slow death, just being outplayed by his opponent here. So he's going f4, trying to ease the tension a little bit, or at least exchanging some pawns. Carlsen responded with bishop f4, which is fine. If e4, the position becomes rather close. Of course, black obtains a passed pawn, protected passed pawn, but, well, white probably can build a good blockade on the dark squares. So bishop h4, a good move, and we see some exchanges here, and in fact, at the end, black's able to repair his pawn structure, doesn't have a double pawn anymore. A lot of pieces have come off, but black has still all the trumps at his side. He has the bishop pair, which is such a huge advantage in the endgame, or especially when the position is open like that, where the bishops really can shine. And like I said, this bishop without a counterpart is causing white a headache, and still having this pawn on c4 and this weakness on b2. So white is fighting here, fighting for draw. Rook d1. Now king f7 was played. I think this is a small inaccuracy. I think it would have been a little bit better to go rook e5 when, of course, white cannot take on d6 because of rook e1 checkmate. King f1, and now rook e6, just defending the pawn on d6. And the point here is that black is keeping the rooks on the board as compared to in the game. And to my mind, it feels that with rooks on the board, this is even better. And you can always, I think, exchange rooks later if you need to. So that just seemed to be a slightly better version. Because in the game after king f7, white played rook d4 and attacking this pawn c4. Obviously, black doesn't want to play d5. That would not make his bishop happy. So he went rook e5, threatening checkmate on e1. King f1, now rook d5. What was the point of this little intermezzo? Now white cannot take on c4 because of this pin. Let me just show you. And that would lose a rook. So, well, that is now forcing more or less the rook exchange. And I guess Carlsen was also happy about that, because he knows his endgame, he can press for a long time with the bishop pair, and of course never has any risk of losing, just a perfect situation in a match like that. Bishop g5, king g6, and now Karjakin plays h4, which I would like to criticize a little bit because it just creates a weakness, I think. White could have just moved the bishop to d8, and I think this position is holdable, if that's a word. I know this term is used in the chess world. I'm not even sure if it's an actual word, but this position can be held with white with perfect play, I think, but it's not going to be easy. White will suffer. After h4, well, the problem is that black can attack this pawn right away. Karjakin's point was that he wanted to activate the knight, bring the knight to f4. And here indeed black should not take on h4, and Carlsen did not do that, because here after knight f4 check, king takes g5, knight takes d5, white will pick up this pawn and has no worries. But instead Carlsen went bishop f7, and he's, well, just prepared to take on h4 now. So Karjakin goes bishop e7. We see this trade here of the h4 pawn against the d6 pawn, but that's a trade black was really willing to take, because now black has this majority of pawns on the king side, so 2 against 1, and he can build at some point a passed pawn. Whereas white, these pawns are worthless. They're just completely blocked by the pawn on c4. So let me make this red, and white can never create a passed pawn, never. So, well, at least as long as these pawns are there. So white is just without any counterplay here and can just hope to somehow set up a fortress to withstand the black tries. And here cosplay bishop d8, and I think this is another really interesting moment. Karjakin went king e2, and I think that's a step in the wrong direction. Knight g1 was the suggestion by the computer, and the point is to get to d4, which is the perfect square for the knight. There it's protected, and it is hindering the black advancements. If g5, then knight f3, bishop d5, knight d4, king g4, and here it seems to me that black cannot make any progress, because, well, if you want to go g4, but in order to play g4 you need to have this pawn protected, but that's just not that easy to do. Let's just make some moves here. King f2, bishop e7, keeping an eye on this pawn. Not king g1 here, because then king g3 is a problem. With this knight pinned, now white doesn't have knight e2 check, which was possible in other variations. So you just play a different move. You play bishop e7, and now you can go king g1 because you keep an eye on this pawn. And it seems to me there's no way forward here for black. I think Karjakin looked at this move. Maybe what he didn't like was bishop g5, going for bishop c1, going for these pawns. But it seems to me that here white can also hold on. g3 is a possible move, but I would personally not like to play g3. It just doesn't feel right. So maybe just bishop c5, and if bishop c1, white can go king e1. And here's one idea to lock the bishop in. Now the bishop cannot get out and can be won by white. So, and if black goes king g4, then knight e2, same idea. If bishop takes b2, just king d2. And if the bishop drops back, king f2, we might have a similar situation we saw earlier. Bishop goes to d6, knight to d4, and it seems white can hold. Of course, still a long way to go, and really, black can try for a long time. So it's never easy and really an uncomfortable position to defend anyway, but to me it seems that was the best setup. King e2, g5, but now knight f2 is definitely a mistake, I'm very certain. Here still maybe white could have gone knight g1, but already it feels very shaky, and I wouldn't be surprised if this position is already lost. Because here black is able to get g4 in, because it comes with a tempo, and I don't know. These positions are difficult to evaluate. They require a lot of calculation with the computer to come to a definite conclusion. But I'm, well, quite sure black is winning. It's always difficult to make these conclusive statements. After knight f2, well, here I am quite sure black is winning. But Carlsen, I think he played too quickly here. he had a great chance here. But he just played natural, he played king g6. But there was a great opportunity, that is bishop d5. And why is that? Well, right now the setup is a little bit inconvenient for white, because here white would like to go g3. The problem is though black has this rather strange move, g4. And why is this working? Well, the point is now that the knight is trapped on f2 forever. You can see, well, obviously the c4 square is covered, h3 is covered, and d1 is also covered, because here black could just take on d1 and this endgame would be winning. This bishop endgame is just winning for black, just putting the bishop on g5 and then coming all the way in, and nothing white can do to stop that. And also there are ideas sometimes to go f4 as well. So this is winning for black. So that means this knight cannot move anymore. And let's just make some moves. Well, what happens here, black can just improve the position. And actually there are moments here where it's just Zugzwang. In fact, I think it's Zugzwang right now. Because if the king goes over here, black can go bishop g5. And white would like to be able to meet this with king e3. Now he can't. And after exchange of bishops, well, black will just play f4 and win. And I think if the bishop moves, well, then there's bishop e3, for example, winning. So white doesn't have any moves. You can play a4, but it just doesn't change anything. Still Zugzwang. And like I said already, knight d1, that would be the same story here. This bishop endgame is winning for black. Important here to push the bishop away from f4. And that's possible because this pawn endgame is winning, since black will just create a passed pawn in the next move. So that means that after bishop d5, once again, that did not happen in the game. White, well, cannot go g3 really, but if king f1, then f4, and this is a much better version here. Black can advance his pawns, and I think we'll just win. This is winning. g3 could be a try, but then bishop f3, and the point is after g takes f4, black can push g4. And once again, the key point here is the domination of this knight on f2, which is just so badly placed. So that was a great opportunity for Carlsen to go bishop d5. Nonetheless, after king g6, his position still remains excellent. But here I think Karjakin once again shows incredible tenacity. Just like in the last game, he goes g4, which was surprising to a lot of people. But it seems to be his best opportunity to create somehow a fortress. The point is that after f takes g4, white actually doesn't take back, but this didn't happen in the game, by the way, doesn't take back, because here, after king f5, well, the king comes in. At some point, black will push g4, and it seems whenever a king is able to come to f5 and there's enough space, then black should be winning. Also, this bishop endgame is winning for black. That's also an important point. But instead of taking back here, white would play knight e4 and put the knight on g3. Now you can see the king cannot really come in if king f5, just knight g3. And here, well, once again, I don't want to give an ultimate statement, but could be quite possible that with perfect play, white can hold this. Still, not an easy task. There's always this idea to try to get the king all the way here, and white has to deal with that. It is still a very complex endgame. In the game, Carlsen played bishop b6. There's no rush to take on g4. And Karjakin went bishop e5. Of course, by the way, just in case you ever wondered, this is never a problem. All the opposite colored bishop endgames are always a draw. This is just a tendency of opposite colored bishop endgames because, well, you just don't have the means to invade on the color of the opponent's bishop, and white can always set up some kind of blockade. So you never want to do that. Carlsen went a5 just to use some move in the future, just in case. Knight d1, and here Carlsen played f4, which is a mistake. He fixes the pawn structure. Of course it looks nice with the passed pawn, protected passed pawn, but it turns out that after this move, Karjakin sets up a fortress and Carlsen is not able to break it. So you should have just kept it as it is. Right now, white wants to go knight e3, and a way to prevent this would have been bishop e6, win after knight e3. Black can just play f4 and then pick up the pawn g4. And white has to go back probably. And you need to try f takes g4 at some point. And once again, I'm not 100% certain if this is winning or not for black, but this is clearly a better try than what happened in the game. Now we see this idea, the king is coming, and if the king now makes it to b3, this is game over for white. So knight f2, hold on, there's still knight e4 idea, so black has to go bishop f5, but now white has to go a4 to stop king b5. But with the pawn on a4, black can of course pick it up at some point, and then we'll have this position where black is up a pawn, and it just feels to me this must be winning. Once again, regrouping, and then well, maybe with perfect computer play, white can hold it. I don't know, but this would have been Carlsen's best chance. So here I'm not sure if this is winning, even though I'm relatively certain earlier with the move bishop d5, what we discussed there, I'm very, very certain. Alright, so after f4, white plays bishop d4, that's an important move. Black cannot take on d4. White here just puts the knight on c3 and everything is secured. So black avoids the bishop exchange, and now this is the setup. Knight goes to f2, and now all white is doing is just waiting. So I'm going through his moves pretty quickly. Black's bringing the king over all the way to a4, which is nice, but just doesn't change anything. Because here's the thing. Right now, in this position, white cannot move the king anymore, but he can move the knight. He can always play waiting moves. The bishop just stays here on d4. That's fine, but the knight can just move. And what we'll see now, actually here knight takes d3 is also a draw, but Karjakin didn't bother because he knew his fortress just holds. Here now the difference is with the bishop on e2, well, now the king is just moving, either c2, c1 or b1, c1. And black can never control all the white piece, and that can never create a Zugzwang situation. So we see some more moving around, and then Carlsen decides to do something. The only idea is in the position to go f3 followed by bishop f4, but white doesn't allow that. That's a key move. Bishop e3, stopping bishop f4. Now bishop d7. Here white should not go for this pawn. That would allow bishop b6, bishop h4 and bishop e3, and the threat of checkmate, checkmate, is forcing the king to move to d1. Then of course the white position falls apart. So instead white just waits, and now bishop f4. Carlsen, of course, as it is in his nature, tries as long as he can. That actually in the last game almost got him a full point, so that's definitely very worth trying. But here white keeps waiting, just not does anything, and the king comes all the way back, but now the white king is also running towards the queen side, and now knight e4 check, and there's the king. Black is picking up this pawn, but well, this pawn is also hanging now, and white regains the pawn, and now there's really not anything to do anymore. The king will just stay on f1, f2 forever, and no progress to be made at all. So in the 94th move, the players agreed to a draw. Wow, Karjakin once again managed to escape And while the game was going on, people were already saying, if he manages to escape again, then he's Houdini, then he gets a degree from Hogwarts, and he has done it. He has shown once again what an incredible defender he is, the best one in the world, you could say. That's a good thing, that he managed to get a draw once again. Bad news is that Karjakin is just ending up in worse positions now, and he cannot possibly defend the whole match. He needs to get better positions. He needs to somehow at least get close to beating Carlsen, because if this continues, Karjakin cannot possibly defend all these positions, all these worst positions. At some point he will crack and lose a game, that's for sure. So he needs to change that. Alright, so that was my analysis of game 4. Once again a marathon, 6.5 hours. But this is awesome. Incredibly rich endgames. Carlsen had this chance in the 42nd move. He missed it. And Karjakin got away once again. Alright, I see you guys soon. Goodbye.